Okay, can everyone sit down? We're several minutes behind schedule, so if everyone grabs a seat, we'll keep talking. And we'll have refreshments afterwards available as well, and people can hang around and talk as long as you want. And the Army Corps guys, they may or may want to run out, but we've got them overnumbered or outnumbered. So the next topic is going to be the SPGP, and we've broken up into two parts. One is the Army Corps of Engineers elements, and the second are DEQ elements. So the Army Corps has issued a permit, SPGP, that allows DEQ to process a lot of these smaller impacts. And Tucker Smith has delegated his work to Anna Lawson, it appears. They're both on the agenda. So Tucker's the Northern Virginia section chief. He's here for moral support, I understand. And that's it. And Anna Lawson has been in charge of writing the SPGP, and she is based in Warrenton, the field office out here. So thank you.
So, like you said, a little bit of history on the SPGP. When the state expanded their program in 2001, they developed the SVGP to kind of combine some of the processing so that there wasn't as much duplication, and then over time it's just sort of evolved and became a little more detailed, I guess, and structured than it was before. So I think most people who have worked with the SBGP are familiar with it, so I don't want to go into a lot of detail of the specifics of it. Generally, it is covering the nationwide 29. So the nationwide 29, which is for residential developments, the SBGP covers the residential development part. The nationwide 29 can still be used for single-family homes. It also covers the nationwide 39, which is for commercial, industrial, and institutional developments, and then the 14 for linear transportation. So I just kind of wanted to go through the changes. Let's see. So in the public notice, we just recently public noticed the SVGP, and in the public notice, I listed the major changes. Obviously, it's not all the changes. There are, minor edits, clarifications to language, cleaning up some of the language that was confusing. But for the purposes of time today, I'm just going to go through the major changes. So the first major one is Section 10 was removed from coverage under the SPGP. So we have two types of waters that are regulations for waters. One is Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act. The other is Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. The SPGP used to cover both. We have removed Section 10. And the reason for that was because DEQ, when they were reviewing these projects, their limit of review is the discharge of the fill, or for their purposes of the state excavation. For us, Section 10, we also have to look at the under and over effect of impacts. So for 404 waters, we only regulate the discharge of fill material or dredge material into the waters or wetlands. With Section 10, we actually kind of regulate almost pretty much everything that occurs in Section 10. So even if you're directly drilling or you're putting an overhead utility. This would be one of those examples where if you had, for instance, a commercial development that had a Section 10 component to it where you would no longer qualify for SBGP, we may utilize the nationwide 39, and a reason why it was not suspended this time. The next item is we added a fillable complete application checklist. The purpose of this was because our needs and requirements for a complete application are not the same as DEQ. Big example is we don't require a permit application fee for your application to be complete. This was causing a lot of confusion as to when it was okay for DEQ to begin the coordination and when it was not. So this sort of eliminates the confusion. It puts everything into one list. As long as you have everything in that list, your list is complete for the purposes of the SPGP. So that means that the DEQ PM project manager knows that they can now forward that on to the Corps for whatever coordination they need, or to Fish and Wildlife for the ESA coordination. They can move on with all the coordination components of the SPGP, even if they're still waiting on something, for instance, like the VWP permit fee for their permitting purposes. So the next thing that we changed is the threshold language and the terms waters. This is not an actual change to our process. It's not an actual change to our regulations. It's just that the wording was changed to be more clear on what exactly we are regulating, how we calculate that into our permit totals, and how we calculate that to our thresholds. The language that we use has been changed to be consistent with what is included in the nationwides. The next item we changed was the exclusion language. So the 12 SPGP had a list of excluded activities that were excluded from coverage under the SPGP. The reason was because if you don't have some sort of coverage under a VWP permit, you couldn't use the SPGP because your SPGP required you to get something from the DEQ. What we've realized in the years of processing this is that that's not necessarily necessary. That's not a requirement. Like if we can cover it under the SPGP, you should be able to get the SPGP as long as they don't, even if they don't have to cover it under a VWP permit. A good example of that would be impacts to for landscaping purposes. It's excluded from coverage under them. We regulate it because if you're landscaping and you discharge fill into a wetland, it is a discharge of fill, and we would require a permit. The caveat there is that it has to be associated with a larger residential, commercial, institutional development. It's not a standalone thing. So if you're a homeowner and you want to put a garden in, the SBGP is not the right thing for you. If you are a large residential company and you're building 400 homes and part of the landscaping is part of your project, then that would be included for coverage under the SPGP. The next thing is the delineation language. This, again, is not a change in our process. It's just a clarification in what exactly we're required. So as many of you that deal with the delineations in our area, you know we have two types. We have a preliminary delineation, and then we have an approved JD. The language was just clarified so that you know you can use both of those with your SPGP application, and that it has to be confirmed by the Corps. The next change was some of the federal processing language was listed in the actual permit the last go around. That was just removed. The process itself has not been removed from how we review these, but it was moved out of the permit because it wasn't appropriate there. It belongs in a standard operating procedure. It doesn't belong in the actual permit language, because when the permit language that we have out on the Mike, I think you have some available if you want to see them. The permit that is going out there is a permit that's being issued from the Corps to the state, to the Commonwealth of Virginia. So when the state issues a letter for the SVGP, they're actually issuing you a verification letter that just says you are meeting the requirements of that permit. So it wasn't appropriate to put that procedure into the permit language. The next item is we added a general condition for 408. So this is for civil works projects. We're required to make sure that projects are not going to have an impact on these projects. And this is a process that we do to review to make sure that there is not an issue. And I believe that was discussed a little bit too with the nationwides. The next thing is the standard compensation ratio. We have added a 1/2 to 1 for open waters, for permanent impacts and or permanent loss to open waters. The reason this was added is because DEQ has changed some of their regulations and how they're handling open waters, and also in how they're requiring compensation for open waters. For us, the impact to open waters is still a discharge of fill into a regulated waterway. At least some of us have told people that you can revert the open waters, if possible, back to the original feature that was there. A lot of people don't like to choose that option because, number one, there's a time delay with allowing it to revert back, and two, there's an unknown as to what exactly it's going to revert back to. It could revert back to a stream that requires $700 a linear foot. The reason we chose a 1/2 to 1 is because as far as I know, in the state of Virginia, we don't have open water credits available anymore. We don't really allow open water creation anymore with banks, and so you're going to have to mitigate out of kind, because when you do purchase credits, you're purchasing wetland credits. So that's why there was a reduced ratio there. The transportation limits were changed. So originally they were in the 12 SBGP, they are 1/3 acre of impact. We've upped those to a 1/2 an acre to be consistent with the nationwide 14 language. And then originally there was lateral encroachment language, and we have removed that, but we have added a limit of 1,000 linear feet of stream impacts. And that linear footage is consistent with what we have in our RP1, which is for VDOT projects, and then also in our nationwide 23, which is for category exclusions. That's why the 1,000 limit was chosen. The next item has changed is the time extension language has been removed, as time extensions will not be granted. So I believe Dave Olson hit on this a little bit. The general permits can only be issued for 5 years. They cannot be extended, but they can be renewed. So at the end of the 2012, we cannot extend the 2012 SPGP. We have to renew it under the 2017. So that's why that language was taken out, because we, per the regulation listed here, we cannot extend it 5 years. The next change, the last major change that we made is that we are proposing termination of the Section 106 programmatic agreement. In the last go around, the 2012 version, there was a CRS position with the DEQ that would do a pre-screen of the 106 and then send it to the Corps if it didn't fall within certain thresholds. And that process has now been eliminated. The DEQ will forward all Section 106 review directly to the Corps for review and determination. Any questions?
There's no questions. I'll just say one thing. Someone was asking me, why is there an SBGP? And the building industry asks for it. So the Home Builder Association of Virginia and NAOP got together when we wrote the law in 2000 and asked to have an SBGP so that we could expedite the permit process for our projects. So that's the genesis of this, and it's been a very effective way of reducing duplication of state and federal resources. So thanks for working on refining it. And we'll turn this over. So questions on the internet.
Sorry. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Hopefully these should be fairly easy. So for the SPGP, do permanent conversion impacts count towards the SPGP threshold?
Yes, they do.
And do they, if it's mechanized land clearing, that counts towards the threshold as well?
Yes.
So what if someone were to use hand clearing only and not mechanized land clearing?
Typically, if they're using hand clearing only, there's not an actual discharge of fill. If there's no discharge of fill, it is not regulated. If it's a 404 water, it's
Okay.
if they go in and they, if it's tree clearing, I mean, usually if they remove the stumps, then there is often an issue there where there is an actual discharge of fill. But if there's no discharge of fill, we don't regulate it in
Okay.
404 water.
Right. And then
DEQ.
right. Final question, do piped stream impacts, such as culvert replacements, count toward the SPGP threshold, both in area and linear footage?
Yes, they do.
Okay. That was it.
So the actual culvert itself, if you replace that culvert, you're taking the whole culvert?
You're taking the linear footage of the stream because that culvert is actually in a waters. So you're going to take that linear footage of waters.
And replace with a new culvert, you're now counting as
It's always counted as an impact. May not necessarily require compensation, but will require it as an impact, yes.
It can't affect your threshold.
right,
Yes.
but no compensation.
I didn't say no compensation. I said we may not require compensation.
I'll say no.
I'm Stuart Tyler with Parsons Transportation Group. I wanted to know if Park and ride lots can be considered part of the linear transportation project.
I believe the rule is that no flat area, right?
Yeah, it's for nationwide, I'm sorry.
In the SBGP language, there's actually a definition of linear transportation in there.
Right, but
I mean, they've said no historically on other interstate projects.
Yeah, typically we don't, well, typically it's not going to be covered under the linear transportation aspect of an SVGP, but it may be covered under the residential, commercial, institutional development. So for instance, if you're putting a bus transport in, we would cover that under institutional. Or commercial, yeah. Everybody's happy, I like it.
Tricia?
You cannot mess up the last presentation of the day. Except for you webinar folks. I'm not very good at standing still and looking forward, so we will see how I do. My name's Tricia Beasley. I manage the Wetlands and Stormwater Program for the Northern Regional Office of DEQ. I'm going to give you a brief presentation, which is going to go behind me, hopefully. Oh, it's my job. Sorry. Hold on. Let's see. I can find my name. Okay. There we go.
And then just that little.
That doesn't look, oh, it looks good to you guys. It doesn't look good to me.
Just
but-
to be clear, in the Northern Virginia area, Trish is the regulator of the day every day.
That's not true. That's not true. Okay, so like I said, I'm Tricia Beasley. I'm going to give you a brief presentation on the 17 SBGP process as we anticipate it today, and some information about transitioning from projects that are covered under the SBGP 12 now to the new SBGP. I am going to throw in a disclaimer right up front. The SBGP is still in draft form, so we are going to attempt to give you the best guidance we can. We're going to make plans based off of this guidance, but until the SBGP is actually final, things could change. The other thing I wanted to let you know is that the Corps and DEQ, we are going to work together to create a question and answer sheet, which we will make available to the public, hopefully within the next couple weeks. And we will, everybody who registered for this session here today will get a copy of that question and answer sheet. Okay, so just to remind everybody that when you apply for an SBGP, you're actually applying for two permits. You're applying for a DEQ general permit, and you're applying for a federal general permit, which is the SBGP. The permit processes are similar and not similar in a couple ways. Both permit processes require complete applications, and the information for the complete application varies some, but the most difficult parts of the application are the same: avoidance of minimization and compensation and things like that. Both permit processes require coordination with resource agencies to determine if there's any impacts to endangered species. At the state level, we coordinate with DCR and the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, and sometimes Fish and Wildlife. For the SBGP process, we always screen with the Fish and Wildlife. The major differences between the SBGP process and the state process come into play because the federal process requires that they screen the project to ensure that there's no impacts to historic resources. In addition, if your project impacts more than a half acre or 300 linear feet, the project has to be coordinated with the Environmental Protection Agency. I feel like I speak pretty loud anyways. Get myself going back. Also, the SBGP term is 5 years. The DEQ general permit term is 10 years. So every time you submit an application for an SBGP, DEQ staff will be processing both permits concurrently and at the same time. We do anticipate some changes to the SBGP process under the new permit cycle. The first change of note is that DEQ staff will not initiate coordination with the Corps or other federal agencies until your application is complete in accordance with the SBGP. The good news is that the new SBGP does include an application complete checklist to assist you in developing a complete application, and it will become very important that your application is complete. Another change that we've made is that under the current SBGP, DEQ does some pre-screening for Section 106 or historic property concerns before we send it over to the Corps. We're going to send it directly to the Corps as soon as the application is complete. We think that will result in some time savings, and it will definitely save us some duplication of effort by sending it directly to the Corps. Under the new SBGP, as Anna M. mentioned in her presentation, there's also the requirement that we screen to make sure that the SBGP project doesn't impact any core civil works projects. In the SBGP itself, there's a link that takes you to a map of where these projects are located at in Virginia. I did a quick review of it. In our territory, not very many. Tidewater and Piedmont, there's quite a few. However, I'm not sure how many activities in those type of water bodies are actually covered under the SBGP, especially since Section 10 is taken out of it now. So I don't think that this will have a significant impact on the SBGP, but it is a potential. The other change you'll see is at the end of the SBGP process, we're going to issue separate verification letters for those two permits that I mentioned at the beginning. Right now, what DEQ staff does is we take the SBGP authorization and we put it into our general permit. In order to prevent confusion, we're now going to give you a verification letter for the SBGP and a DEQ general permit. The verification letter for the SBGP will make it clear what the permit term is. It's 5 years, not 10. And it will also help clarify exactly what activities that SBGP is authorizing. That way, if there is an activity that DEQ is regulating, but the SBGP isn't, and we run into compliance issues later, your permit will be more well-defined. Once you obtain authorization under the 17 SBGP, if you need to add additional permanent or temporary impacts, you'll submit a notice of plan change request to DEQ just as you do today. However, when DEQ staff receives that request, we're going to screen it for threatened and endangered species at the federal level. We're going to go through that Fish and Wildlife process. We're also going to touch base with the Corps project managers to make sure that those additional impacts don't change the relationship with historic properties for the site. And if your additional impacts are over 1/4 of an acre or over 100 linear feet, we're going to complete the federal agency coordination process again. We'll send it to EPA and we'll send it to the Corps and Fish and Wildlife. For each of these processes, we will include the previous coordination information so that when we, like if we're sending it to Anna, she'll know that, you know, what she decided before, so she'll hopefully be able to look at just those additional impacts. Non-compliance resolution. In the event that DEQ staff finds non-compliance that includes additional impacts, again, we're going to go through that process to make sure that those additional impacts don't impact threatened and endangered species at the federal level. We'll make sure that they don't change the historic properties coordination. And if they're over 100 linear feet or 1/4 of an acre, we're going to coordinate with EPA, Fish and Wildlife, and the Corps. At the end of either of these processes, in the past, what we would do is send you a DEQ general permit that's modified, and that SBGP would be in there somewhere. Now what we'll do is send you a new verification of your project under the SBGP. Projects that are currently authorized under the 12 SBGP, in accordance with General Condition 45, which those of you who have a 12 SBGP, you're going to know General Condition 45 pretty well, I think. General Condition 45 indicates that if your project has started construction or is under contract to commence construction prior to May 31st of 2017, you can continue your work in reliance upon the SBGP until May 31st of 2018. If your project will not be under construction or will not have commenced construction prior to May 31st of 2017, your permit is dead May 31st, 2017. Sorry to use such a strong word, but it is dead on that day. If you're going to operate under General Condition 45, you do not need to submit anything to DEQ. So please do not. In our region, we have 390 SBGPs that will expire after May 31st. We do not need 200 letters saying that you're under contract or that you've started. However, if you are going to continue under this condition for 12 months after the expiration date, you do need to be prepared to provide proof of being under contract or proof of the date you started construction, if requested. Most likely this would come up during a compliance inspection, or if you come in for a change, you know, who knows. So be prepared to have that information on hand. The easiest question of the day is what qualifies as under contract to commence construction? The easy answer that I have is a contract with a company to complete the land disturbance or construction activity associated with work in waters of the U.S. I like that answer. It's an easy answer. There's about 1,000 scenarios that we're going to have to consider that go beyond that answer. But if you have that, then you are okay. All the other scenarios we'll have to talk about on a case-by-case basis for your project. What I'm also comfortable saying is that approved site plan is not a contract to commence construction. If you need re-verification under the 17 SBGP because your permit's either expiring on May 31st, 2017, or you know that you can continue work because you're going to work under General Condition 45, but you're not going to be done before May 31st of 2018, apply for your 17 SBGP as soon as possible after the effective date. We've already been asked, can you apply now? Yes, you can submit DEQ, the information, to re-verify your project under the 17 SBGP, but we will not be able to act on it until that permit is effective. The other thing that we would just caution you is that because it is still a draft permit, you could apply today and find out that maybe some of the information changed and you might need to submit an update. But if you're overzealous and you send it, we will try not to lose it. We do recommend that if you are going to be using that General Condition 45 and continuing work over the next 12 months after May 31st, and at any point you realize that you're not going to have your work complete, get that application in as soon as possible. Do not wait until April of 2018 to apply for your new SBGP. How to apply for re-verification of a 17 SBGP. Technically, you are applying for a new permit, so a new application is required. Logistically, we're going to ask you for 3 pieces of information. We're going to ask you for a letter signed by the permittee, now the applicant, asking us to reinstate their original joint permit application as a new application for the new SBGP. We're also going to ask you that you provide us an impact table that totals your impacts by acreage that includes the stream channel acreage. In the previous SBGP, we may not have been accurate enough in those calculations. During this SBGP cycle, the Corps has clarified it that it needs to be consistent with those nationwides, so that stream channel acreage needs to count towards the acreage thresholds of waters of the U.S. Very rare cases, this could kick you out of coverage for the SBGP. That's going to be very unlikely, though. It's more than likely that it may change your coordination requirements because of those half-acre thresholds. The other piece of information we are going to be requesting is any updated information the permittee or applicant has about threatened and endangered species or historic resources, specifically the northern long-eared bat, which I don't know when it became listed. It seems like last year, but I think it was 2 years ago. But if you all remember, any permit holders here remember what that was like. That's what this summer is going to be like with the reissuance of the SVGP. It's just going to be a different topic. But so the existing permittees are going to have 2 choices that are generally available on how to address the northern long-eared bat if you have any tree clearing in your project. What we'll do in our question and answer sheet is we will provide a template letter for item number 1 that the applicant can fill out and send to us. We'll also provide you all the information you need to make your northern long-eared bat determination. You're either going to decide on a time of year restriction, or you're going to choose to abide by the biological opinion. The question and answer sheet will give you all the information you need to make that decision. Once we receive a request for re-verification, for work under the 17 SBGP. DEQ staff is going to process this request very similar to how we would process a new application under the new SBGP. The only difference being we're not going to require a review checklist to be completed. DEQ staff will evaluate the previous application that you're going to be resubmitting to make sure that that checklist is, all the criteria are met. We do not anticipate that this will be a difficult hurdle because the application requirements haven't changed very much. So I get to see Ben holding up time cards now. Doing good, Ben. Once we verify that your application is complete, we'll go through all the necessary coordination processes. And then when it's all said and done, we'll send you a separate SBGP verification letter. For those of you who like visual aids, this flow chart summarizes the 4 previous slides. And I'm not going to walk through it. It's one of those things that you have to marinate on. But the most important thing, the most important question anybody holding an SBGP needs to be aware of is whether or not they're going to be under construction or under contract to construct prior to May 31st, 2017. I was asked the question before coming here today, what can the public do to expedite their permit process? I'm not sure this is the answer people are looking for, but this is my honest answer. The easiest 2 steps you can take to expedite your permit process is to conduct a pre-application meeting and to submit a complete application. The pre-application meeting provides you the opportunity to get information from us about your project, the regulators. It also provides us the opportunity to ask you some questions about your project and have a frank communication about the hurdles you may have and your time sensitivities and all the unique factors. If you do decide to conduct a pre-application meeting, we definitely ask that you invite the Corps and DEQ to that meeting so that you get the maximum benefit out of the meeting. Submitting a complete application instantly expedites your permit process. It is easier said than done. However, the new SBGP does have a checklist, and use the checklist. And if you have any questions about what information is required to satisfy that checklist, then give us a call and we'll let you know. At that point, we can take questions.
I actually have a couple questions. Can you hear me?
Are they from Christie? Is that how it
So for the completeness review, you're going to be reviewing the core permit or core permit application and DEQ permit application at the same time. But if you feel that the core side is complete, even though you feel like DEQ is not, you will still kick it off to initiate Section 106. So there's
Absolutely.
no delay. Okay. And then did I hear for notice of plan changes, did you say we need to submit additional temporary impacts as a notice of plan change as well?
What it is for our process, our DEQ's process hasn't changed for that, but the way we're gonna respond to it under the SBGP is changing. So any additional permit or temporary impacts under the SVGP, we need to rescreen those impacts for Section 7, and we need to touch base with the Corps on historics, technically rescreen with the Corps. I'm calling it touch base because the Corps reps will have the knowledge in their previous coordination, so we don't anticipate it will take long to your response. And then we're going to re-verify your project under the SBGP.
That was my next question is, what do you think those timeframes are for the Section 106 and the ETS?
Well, certainly for the ETS, it won't be much time because Christoph, Wynn, and Allison will do it right away. But for
A 30-day clock or 15 days or?
technically, if you're implementing the biological opinion on the additional impacts, then yeah, the 30-day clock would apply.
Okay. So for an additional temporary impact regulated by the Corps, we need to plan on at least 30 days prior to approval.
What I would like to do is table that question.
Okay.
But I will answer it. We'll
Okay.
make sure we write that question down. I will answer it in the Q&A because I'm not sure what level of scrutiny is going to be
Okay.
needed for
Sure.
that rescreening.
Okay.
Especially if your additional impact is within the area that we already coordinated for the bat. So,
Right, so that makes sense.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure at this point.
Okay. Those were my questions. Does anybody else have any questions?
can ask you questions all day, but I won't. Hey, I just want to thank, on behalf of all of us, thank the Army Corps and DEQ for taking the time to prepare for this and come up here and give this talk. I think everybody here is affected by these regulations, and it's just a wonderful experience to have the opportunity to listen to you, to ask questions, and if you can stay for a little bit, I'm sure some of these people would love to talk to you one-on-one. So thank you again. Okay.
Just a quick reminder for those of you that are looking for CEUs to please sign out with Annie when you leave and fill out the evaluation form. Thank you.